evening and welcome to Overhauling Insolvency Code. I'm Supriya Srinath. In a bid to prevent misuse of the existing insolvency laws, the Cabinet today did recommend some changes to the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code as an ordinance, which will of course get the precedence sent soon. ET now learns the amendments will prevent willful defaulters from bidding for stressed assets altogether. Will that move bode well for India Inc.? To discuss that, we're joined by a stellar panel right here. We've got Mamta Binani, President of the Institute of Company Secretaries of India, Sandeep Parekh, founder of FinSec Law Advisors, Pradeep Kumar, former MD SBI, and our consulting editor Maithili Busnurmat right here. Thanks very much each one of you for being with us. And let me begin with you, Sandeep Parekh. Barring willful defaulters is what we've picked up, is what the ordinance clearly says. How do you read this decision and its impact? Is this perhaps differentiating between fraud and failure? How exactly are you going to read this prima facie?
Okay, so I think what was coming out in the morning was that all defaulters will in effect be barred from bidding for their companies when the restructuring occurs. So I think now it's been more nuanced, and I think what they've said is we're not going to bar all promoters from purchasing shares and funding the revival of the company, but only those who have been involved with either fraud or are one of the willful defaulters. I think it's a positive move in terms of you don't want the people who were beneficiaries of crony capitalism or who have committed fraud to come back into the company, because this, as Einstein has been misquoted to say that, if mad people are those who keep doing the same thing and expect different results each time. So I think it's a good move to nuance it. It also gives a good lay of the land, regulatory lay of the land for people, banks particularly. Now they know that they can, by as a matter of right, exclude the shady promoters, and at the same time promoters who only faced failure, they are not automatically excluded, which is a good sign, because promoters are very often the best people to turn around the company.
I'm presuming a lot of promoters who failed out there will agree with you. But Maithili, how do you view this? Because I know you have a very strong opinion on this, given the fact that this isn't just, this is not just going to, because there was this fear that promoters could be banned completely. That is unlikely to happen. This completely bans willful defaulters, even though, the fact of the matter is, and I'm going to raise this point here before we take this forward, not one of the 11 cases in IBC have a willful defaulter. So, I mean, that's irony or whatever you may call it, but willful defaulters will be banned. Promoters, yes, more strict criteria, and I'm going to talk about, the dice being against them in just a bit, but your quick take first.
Well, Supriya, I think the ordinance only makes explicit what was implicit all along, because the committee of creditors is supposed to be the wise men who have commercial knowledge and understanding, and they would not be looking at somebody who was a willful defaulter who had committed fraud. So I think the ordinance only makes explicit what was always implicit. It was expected that the committee of creditors and the insolvency professional would take care to ensure that somebody who had not shown integrity, who had committed fraud, who was a willful defaulter, because the definition of willful defaulter is also very clearly there in the RBI circular. So I think it only makes explicit. But having said that, the fact is that we have had a case like Synergy Dori, and I think Mamta will be able to tell you more about it, because it became a very controversial case where the committee of creditors, perhaps one could argue that through somewhat a front company, the original promoter was able to buy it over at a completely written down value. So I think now it strengthens the hands of the committee of creditors, strengthens the hands of the lenders, and insolvency professionals will be much more careful before they allow such things to happen.
Okay, so what was implicit? And obviously no committee of creditors would have allowed a willful defaulter to get in, but we've had aberrations in the past, and maybe that will get completely weeded out. But Mamta Binani, come in on the fact that the point that Maithili is raising, what was implicit has now become explicit, and this will perhaps give more teeth to the committee of creditors and those who are in charge of resolving that insolvency, to make sure that willful defaulters do not get in even with different fronts.
Sure. Let me just quickly tell you what is the design of the code. Design of the code is in such a way that the government says that it is okay to fail, and it also wants to keep the entrepreneurial stint of the people intact. And therefore, when it says that if the failure is not due to, because nowadays if you have seen, because of the IBBI notification dated 7th of November, it says that regulation 38 has gone for a change, and therefore because of regulation 38 change, each and every case is also going for investigative audit, or popularly known as forensic audit. Now, willful defaulter is of course being, a list is being carried on the RBI website also, that these people are the willful defaulters. But apart from that, I think the intent of the government is also to mention that when the forensic audit is done and the report really talks negative in the sense that it actually shows that fraud has happened and the money has been siphoned off, even in such cases, though the name of that promoter is not in the willful defaulter list, but even in such cases, probably the COC will not allow those promoters also to take a backdoor entry. Now, why this entire thing is being done is because, of course, in the insolvency law, if you see section 35, subsection 2H, it tells the resolution professional as a mandate that the RP has to invite resolution plans. Now, it doesn't go on to say that the invitation is not to be given to the existing promoters, and therefore there is such a lot of discussion going on because the law and the design of the code itself was not to bar the promoters. Let me also tell you that even the US bankruptcy law or the UK bankruptcy law also has no such features which bars the existing promoters. But today the change that is coming in by way of an ordinance, I think it's a very, very welcome move, because at least the persons who have been in the wrongdoing, and it is proved that the person has been into wrongdoing, he does not get a chance to buy the same asset at a lower price. My colleague also spoke about the case of Synergy Dure. I would just like to say that because it's an example that people may like to just understand. In that case, the company which has actually taken over the SIC assets by way of a resolution plan was an SPV which was formed by all the bankers put together. So, it was a company which was an SPV formed by those same very bankers, and that company was formed because the SIC company was not able to get any loan from any banks because it was all declared NPA. And therefore, this SPV company actually brought back the company because the liquidation value was just showing at 7 crores, but it brought back the company at about 54 crores. So, there was no reason why the COC actually had to say no, because if the company would have gone, because there are only two alternatives, friends. One, the company gets resolved, and the other imperative decision is to go for liquidation. Right. So, if in case the company could have gone for liquidation, the only value that it would have actually got it was just 7 crores. So, in this case also, in all the other cases, I must put on record that after the change in regulations, a very welcome change brought in by Mrs. Sahu, who is the chief of IBBI, when he said that you need to get an investigative audit done. It's not mentioned in explicit terms. Let me tell you that on record. It's not mentioned in explicit terms, but by the drafting of the regulation itself, we understand that all the RPs are taking all the cases for forensic or investigative audit, whatever word you put in.
Okay, I'll just request my panel, thanks for those initial points, Mamta. I'll just request my panel to make it brief so that we can cover a lot of ground, and that's the real intention of this show. But Mr. Pradeep Kumar, while there is no blanket ban on promoters as was being feared, there is of course a blanket ban on willful defaulters. The irony is that there's not a single willful defaulter in the 11 cases that have landed in IBC. My question really is that, is the dice loaded against the promoter class? Because the criteria is very strict, and let me just begin with you. Is life just the same for the promoter class even though there is no blanket ban? Or do you believe because of the strict rules, strict criteria, the dice is loaded against them in many ways?
See, I think a blanket ban is not very welcome because many businesses fail for various reasons, not only for the promoter being a willful defaulter or he having siphoned off money or malfeasance. There can be genuine business failures. So I believe that I don't think there be a blanket ban on promoters. If you see laws abroad, maybe in the US and UK also, promoters are not banned. Yes, we have to ensure that the promoters who are responsible for making it a SIC company or the account becoming NPA and going to IBC should not be allowed to bid. But the problem is in our system is declaring a willful defaulter is extremely difficult. It's a long drawn process, a lot of evidence is required. Now, of course, the IBC says you will have to do an investigative audit. Now, we have only 9 months to resolve or liquidate. And I think in many cases, we have already lost 2 months. How long will we take to do an investigative audit and find out whether there has been malfeasance or siphoning of funds by the promoters? That is the moot point. But yes, the ordinance strengthens the hands of the bankers, because if a willful defaulter had bid and if banks had rejected it, maybe there would have been litigation. That has been prevented specifically by this ordinance. I still believe promoters who have not been tainted should be given a chance to run the company, because I think they would be the best to bring back the company to health, of course subject to all other factors, whether how much equity they bring in, whether their ability to bring, how much equity they bring in, the ability to bring in equity, and whether they have the technical competence to run such a large company. Of course, all those things will be seen by the bankers. But I believe this is a step in the right direction, and the hands of the bankers will be strengthened very much.
No, there is no denying the fact that I think promoters are best placed to run an asset if, of course, the intention was to run it well. And, of course, willful defaulters should be out of the system. But, Sandeep Parekh, you made a very, very nice description and you made a nice distinction to begin with. The differentiation between fraud versus failure. My question to you really is that if, like Mr. Pradeep Kumar said, you know, establishing a willful default is very difficult. 9 months you have for the entire process, 2 months have been lost for some. You now have an investigative audit, forensic audit has been done for some. My question really to you is, A, because it is so difficult to establish a willful default, do you believe, and there are cases in Indian industry and of promoters who've treated debt as equity, who've cared two hoots about the loans that they have taken for banks, and they may still not be willful defaulters. What happens to them? How do they learn their lessons? Because they can go ahead and still bid for those assets.
See, first of all, willful default is where there's some money owed, there's capability to pay, and there's default. And that necessarily is connected to whether the individual is liable to pay. In fact, most cases, personal guarantees are taken from the promoter, so there is a liability. But otherwise, there is limited liability. So if there's genuine failure and the promoter does not pay, he is not obliged to pay, because it's a limited liability concept, and therefore the promoter is not asked to pay. Having said that, I think in most cases promoters do give personal guarantees, so they could be hauled up for willful default. I think the bigger picture still is what you mentioned, is that if there's fraud, if there's some kind of mischief which has occurred, the investigation itself would take a much longer period of time than the 6 months which is budgeted for the whole insolvency process. So I think that will be the challenge. And the 11 cases which you mentioned, all of them are not kind of completely in the white. Many are being investigated for various levels of malfeasance. So I think we'll need to wait and see whether those entities are going to get away, or are they going to be entitled to bid for it, or if there's some kind of forensic report which comes out in the meantime, would they be barred from bidding for the residual stake?
Fair point. I think Mamta Binani had a point to make there, Mamta.
Yeah. Yes. Supriya, I just wanted to mention that in the cases which are going on, because of the notifications, etc., in this case also forensic will be initiated. In these cases, of course, time will be a challenge, because I think all of them, if forensic is initiated, it normally takes about 45 to 60 days. And if the report, needs further modifications because of further data, then it may need a longer time. I feel that in all these cases, probably everybody has to go for a extension of period. But let me tell you, the cases which are now coming in our forte, we are initiating forensic audit from day one. So, for example, when the RP takes charge on day one, it also starts to scout for a valuer, because it needs to appoint 2 valuers. Similarly, we are also now taking steps to even appoint an investigative auditor or a forensic auditor, whatever name you say. So, in these cases, if we are taking steps from day 1 or day 3, day 4, then we foresee that in the next 1 month or 45 days, we will be able to get the report in hand. And therefore, when the COC comes into picture, because you must be aware, the COC normally comes into the picture on the 30th day, because by that time the COC is formed. So by that time, at least we have the first draft of the report. If not the first draft, we know what's going on, you know, because we have had a hang of it, we get all the information. And nowadays, the kind of structure the code has, the promoters, the KMPs, etc., are all bound to actually cooperate with the resolution professional. We do see some tough promoters, you know, coming on our way, and they are not very easy goers. They don't want to pass on information because they feel that, okay, who's the RPR? I mean, why should we give all the information? Let her dig out, let her take it out. And you know, it becomes very tough, because in such cases, then the RP straight away goes to the NCLT after it has done all its ways to take out the data. If it doesn't do well that way, we go to the NCLT, and Honorable NCLT, with a prayer that, my lord, you have to direct the people to cooperate and coordinate with the RP. I think apart from the cases which are going on, I think in India today more than 300 cases are live. In all those cases, believe you me, we are all now going for forensic or investigative audit, and in such cases, because they are at the fag end of those 180 days period, we may have to go for extension. But I think the new cases which will come up, we may see the light of the day even in 180 days.
Right.
And I must also mention here very quickly that not
one second, Mamta, I'm sorry, I'll have to interrupt you there. No, Mamta, 1 second. I'm going to Mr. Pradeep Kumar. I'll have to interrupt you there. We'll have to keep our answers a little brief so that we can cover more ground. The point that she's making, that, you know, new cases will perhaps see speedier resolution, but the old ones, there may be an extension required. Mr. Pradeep Kumar, does that defy the whole idea of an insolvency code? The whole idea was that you've got to resolve this big, bad debt burden, and to do so, you have this law, and there's a timeline that has been attached to this. Do you believe if those timelines get extended, and if those timelines perhaps are delayed, it defies the whole purpose of this whole Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, the whole idea of why it, you know, this was brought about?
See, the law itself provides for a 3-month extension from the initial 180 days. So wherever you initiate forensic audit, especially since some of the large companies, projects have been on for the last 7 to 10 years, so maybe they'll have to go back at the, 7, 8 years back and do a forensic audit. So it might take time. So I believe maybe in large cases, people may ask for extension. I'm not very sure when they have really started a forensic audit, because I've heard that even before the current amendments which were made in November 7th or rulings, people had started a forensic audit in quite a few cases. So, or whatever, investigative audit or whatever you call it. So in some cases, maybe yes, they may have to go beyond the period of 6 months. I think the law provides for this period beyond 6 months for certain exigencies which come through. I think this is an exigency. Maybe the IRP or the credit committee of creditors have to go back to NCLT and ask for an extension. But of course, the law permits only an extension of 3 months. They cannot go beyond 3 months. So I think this is okay, and especially when the cases are very large and which have already gone to the bankruptcy code. Whereas in the cases that are going to be referred in future, I think, as Mamta was saying, from day one, the IRP has to initiate an investigative or a forensic audit. So in that, and maybe some of those cases which will be referred later may not be as big as some of the cases which have been referred in the first lot of 12. So the forensic audit may be also got to be done with a reasonable period of time, and maybe we may not require an extension beyond 6 months.
Right. Michael, I wanted to come in on one point. You know, this whole idea of the government intervening is all very good, and, you know, the ease of doing business and making the law a lot better, giving people who are going to decide more teeth. But does this debate also germinate from the fact that there are vested interests out there? There are large corporates out there who would want to bid for these assets, who would not want promoters to get involved. You know, I'm not going to name anybody, but there are big business houses out there who are lobbying for promoters to be kept out. You know, like Sandeep Parekh pointed out, there's a genuine case of failure. You know, there's no blanket ban, but there are stricter regulations today. Is this also a function of big business at play?
Well, yes, in a country, in a democracy rather, you will always have big interests at play, vested interests, but you have vested interests on both sides. But what happens is that in the case of promoters, since by and large they are seen as, with blackened faces, they are not seen in good light, it is the others who seem more virtuous, who seem to have on the upper hand. And yes, there have been a lot of voices saying that promoters should be kept out, and promoters, we haven't seen them have the courage to say that, look, we are not necessarily guilty, don't condemn us without hearing us, and we also should be given a say. But having said that, I think the ordinance is good because, as I said, it makes explicit what was implicit earlier, the committee of creditors. But I want to mention two other things also, Supriya. In India, the resolution professionals are still to really gain experience and gain ground. In many cases, they have no experience of handling such large accounts and how to go about it. They lack the expertise, they lack the deep understanding that is necessary. Abroad, typically you find it is the big four, the audit companies, that typically are appointed as resolution professionals. In India, we have gone the other way. We have chosen not to go in for the big four. I am not holding a brief for them, but I am just saying that when you appoint individual resolution professionals, they lack the experience, B, the wherewithal also to go into these complicated cases. Number two, I think we also need to hold the chartered accountants responsible. In many cases, you find the balance sheets are completely unreliable, and that is where, and what do bankers do? They have to go depend on these balance sheets. So, I think the chartered accountants should also be held accountable. Another aspect I think which we really need to consider is that, whenever you have a forensic audit that is pending, we need to go into greater detail and find out how good is a forensic audit, and that again is likely to create problems and extend the period, as Pradeep says, and that might defeat the entire purpose. But as long as there is a timeline, I think the broad spirit must be maintained.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's no denying the fact that you've got to stick to timelines, but you've also got to see the ecosystem. This is fairly nascent in India, and I think availability of insolvency professionals, like you're pointing out there, is a big challenge. But Sandeep Parekh, one of the questions that I want to take forward with both. Can I go across to Sandeep Parekh? Okay. Sandeep Parekh, one of the points that I want to take forward with both you and Pradeep Kumar is on banks. While banks are a big stakeholder in this entire process, how do you believe today's changes in the ordinance protects them? Because, as far as the issue of haircut is concerned, for instance, you now have promoters who failed, not defaulted, who fail taking haircuts, making a comeback into the project. How does this really help banks? At the end of the day, it's also about recovering the debt.
See, broadly, the banks have always been, between a rock and a hard place. So, essentially, they need to recover money from the very people who defaulted to them, the people who are in charge. And if we are to believe that complete outsiders are going to be able to take charge of the company and may make the banks whole, I think that would be stretching it. So, I think ideally some level of cooperation from the promoters is necessary to even to wind up the company, forget running the company. I think the banks are, I think this new position is going to help them in from a regulatory certainty in a way. Because they say, they can now know for sure that the promoters of a company X would not be able to participate in purchasing the stake when the company is going to be restructured. So, I think it's going to be kind of more certain regulatory environment for the banks in terms of who will finally be in charge of the company when it's restructured. But it's definitely going to be tough because you need to rely on somebody at least from the inside for either restructuring or for dissolving the assets of the company.
Okay. Mr. Pradeep Kumar, you want to add on to that? How does this change life for banks? And yes, it kind of ring fences them because now it's very explicit that defaulters will not be a part of the process, they will be barred. But other than that, of course, banks have more say, they have more comfort. But how does this really change things for banks, given the fact that the whole idea is speedier, and just resolution?
No, see, wherever, let us say, the bank wants to reject the offer of promoter, which is on paper better than that of other bidders. And if the loss, the haircut is minimal in the promoter's bid, that is where the banks are in a dilemma. Suppose the promoter says a bid with a 30% haircut and all other bidders came in with, let us say, 40%. Can the bank reject a bid of 30%? No, at least in the case of willful defaulters, where there is diversion of money, siphoning of funds, and malfeasance, you can. The law gives them protection. Earlier, perhaps, if they had done it, perhaps they would have been tagged to court, or even the investigating agency and the vigilance agencies of the government will question them in the future. And that Damocles sword will always hang on them. Now, I think it is made very clear in the law. The law is very explicit and saying that willful defaulters, siphoning of funds and you can reject the bids. That is a very good step the government has taken, and I think it gives the banker a layer of protection. So, and they'll be able to take decisions with far greater confidence and also right decisions, not hand it back to promoters who may not be willful defaulters, but who have, audits prove otherwise, like malfeasance, siphoning, which has not been explicitly mentioned earlier. Now that is explicitly mentioned, I think their hands are strengthened, and to an extent even litigation perhaps will be reduced by the promoters going to court after the decision is taken, perhaps not in their favor in the resolution process.
Okay, time for one last question, and Sandeep Parekh, I'm going to quickly let you take that one. What are some of the other changes that you believe will enable speedier resolution, and if not resolution, then quick liquidation? One of the stories that we put out right here at ET now this morning was that perhaps it will be done away with CCI approval. We don't know if it's a part of the ordinance just yet. Of course, only when it's out we will know. But, on those lines, what are some of the other things that you would believe would have made this easier?
No, so I think I'll tell you very, very quickly. I'll just say what is the problem with the current ordinance is that where there's allegation of fraud, as I mentioned, the period of time would extend beyond, it would extend the 6-month period, which is during which the resolution or the insolvency process is supposed to end. And the promoters who are crooked particularly would go out of the way to delay the process of the forensic audit or investigation. So I think if you look at the incentives, I think there's a big incentive for promoters to create a delay so that they're not debarred, because if they cooperate, they would likely be found guilty. If they're found guilty, they cannot own the shares in the future. So I think the incentives need to be realigned so that defaulters, crooked promoters who are also defaulters do not get the benefit of their own wrong.
Okay, a very quick word to Maithili, and Maithili, I want to just quickly close the debate with you then. Go ahead.
Yeah, very quickly, Supriya, because I think we lost connectivity, so I'm not sure you heard. I think it's also important to establish accountability of the chartered accountants. And lastly, I think the Companies Act needs to be amended to prevent this excessive pyramiding of companies. It is this problem that we have in India of a huge number of companies, sister companies, subsidiary companies, associate companies, and then it becomes possible for some benami companies to bid on behalf of the promoter. So I think the Companies Act also needs to be amended, and that is really overdue.
Indeed, that overhaul is long overdue for this to take off in a meaningful way. But thank you very much, Mr. Pradeep Kumar, Sandeep Parekh, Maithili Basturmat, and Mamta Binani for joining us on this very special show. The big changes being made to the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, and the whole idea is to crack down on bad debt. Thanks very much for tuning in, viewers. Keep it with ET Now.